The clattering of hooves against dusty earth was the only warning Katherine Zimmerman had before her father's ranch erupted into chaos. It was 1875 in the small town of Silver Springs, New Mexico Territory, and her life was about to be violently uprooted by the consequences of her father's reckless gambling. "Pa," Katherine called, rushing from the modest kitchen where she'd been preparing supper. At 22, she'd been running the household since her mother's death 5 years earlier, managing what little they had with careful precision. George Zimmerman's weathered face appeared ashen as he burst through the door, followed by 3 men in expensive suits, men Katherine recognized as associates of Silas Thornton, the wealthiest and most ruthless businessman in the territory. "Katherine, go to your room," her father ordered, voice trembling. "I believe the young lady should stay," said the tallest of the 3 men, his voice smooth as oil but just as toxic. "This concerns her now." Katherine felt her blood run cold. "What's happening?" she demanded, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron. "Your father owes Mr. Thornton a considerable sum," the man explained, removing his hat with mock courtesy. $5,000 to be exact, due today. The amount made Katherine's knees weak. It was an impossible sum, more than their ranch would earn in 5 years. "We don't have that kind of money," Katherine protested, looking to her father, who seemed to have aged a decade in minutes. George Zimmerman's eyes couldn't meet his daughter's. "I thought I could win it back, Katie." "The cards were good, I swear it. Your father made certain arrangements," the man continued. "In the absence of funds, Mr. Thornton has agreed to accept alternative payment." The blood drained from Katherine's face as understanding dawned. "Alternative payment." "You, Miss Zimmerman," the man said plainly. "Mr. Thornton requires a housekeeper at his estate in Santa Fe. Your father has signed the contract. You belong to Mr. Thornton now." "That's not possible," Katherine whispered, but the paper thrust into her hands told a different story. Her father's shaky signature transferred her services, her very freedom, to Thornton for 5 years. "I had no choice, Katie," her father pleaded. "They were going to take everything. At least this way you'll have a roof over your head and I can keep the ranch." Katherine felt the walls closing in. "When?" was all she could manage to ask. "Now. Pack your things." The next hour passed in a blur as Katherine, numb with shock and betrayal, gathered her meager possessions into a carpetbag. The men waited impatiently on the porch while her father hovered uselessly in her doorway. "I'll find a way to pay him back," George promised. "I'll get you out of this." Katherine couldn't answer him. The promises were hollow, they both knew it. This wasn't the first time his gambling had brought them to ruin, but it was certainly the worst. As the men escorted her to their waiting carriage, Katherine took one last look at the only home she'd ever known. The modest ranch house, the struggling cattle, the distant mountains, all of it burned into her memory as she was helped into the carriage that would take her away. They hadn't traveled more than a mile when the sound of galloping hooves approached from behind. The carriage slowed as a lone rider on a magnificent black stallion pulled alongside. "Hold up there," the rider called out. The carriage came to a stop, dust billowing around them on the desert road. The door opened, and Katherine found herself looking up at one of Thornton's men, his hand resting warningly on his pistol. "State your business, Cowboy. We're on Mr. Thornton's affairs." The rider dismounted with fluid grace, revealing himself to be tall and broad-shouldered. His face was partially shadowed by his hat, but Katherine could see a strong jawline darkened by stubble. He wore simple clothes, dusty from the trail but of good quality, and carried himself with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to handling trouble. "Name's Preston James," he said, approaching the carriage but keeping a respectful distance from the armed men. I couldn't help but overhear the commotion back at the Zimmerman place. Katherine leaned forward, curious despite her despair. She recognized him vaguely, a successful rancher who'd bought property north of town about a year ago. They'd exchanged pleasantries at church socials and market days, but little more. "This isn't your concern, James," the lead man said dismissively. Preston's eyes found Katherine's, and she was struck by their intensity, a vivid blue that seemed to cut through the dust and gloom. "I think it is. How much does Zimmerman owe?" "5,000, Katherine answered before the others could stop her. "My father lost it gambling." Preston nodded thoughtfully, then reached into his saddlebag. "I'll pay it, right now." The three men exchanged glances of disbelief. "Mr. Thornton has already accepted alternative payment," the leader said, nodding toward Katherine. "Then I'll pay 15,000, Preston replied without hesitation, pulling out a leather pouch. "Triple the debt. Tell Thornton it's a better deal." Katherine's breath caught in her throat. No one in these parts had that kind of money to throw around casually, no one except perhaps Thornton himself. The leader's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Why would you do that?" Preston didn't answer him. Instead, he counted out $15,000 in banknotes and held them out. "Take it. Tell your boss the debt is settled." The man hesitated, but greed won out. He snatched the money, quickly counting to confirm the amount. After a tense silence, he nodded to his companions. "Miss Zimmerman," Preston said, extending his hand to help her from the carriage. "You're free to go." As Katherine stepped down, legs shaking beneath her, the lead man tipped his hat mockingly. "Mr. Thornton may not be pleased about this." "Mr. Thornton's got his money 3 times over," Preston replied coolly. "Miss Zimmerman is no longer any of his concern." The men climbed back into the carriage, and as the dust settled in their wake, Katherine found herself standing beside Preston James on the empty road, her carpetbag at her feet. "Why?" she asked when she finally found her voice. "Why would you do that for me?" Preston looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "Now you don't owe nobody anything," he said simply. "Not your father, not Thornton, not me. $15,000 says otherwise, Mr. James." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "The money wasn't for you to repay. It was to buy your freedom. It's yours now to do with as you choose." Katherine stared at him in confusion. "I don't understand. You can go back to your father's ranch, or you can start over somewhere else entirely. The choice is yours." He moved to his horse, preparing to mount. "Wait," Katherine called, suddenly afraid to be left alone on the road with this newfound freedom she didn't know how to navigate. "I can't accept this. It's too much." Preston paused, one foot in the stirrup. "Consider it an investment in justice, Miss Zimmerman." "Justice doesn't cost $15,000, Mr. James. Sometimes it does." His eyes held hers steadily. "And sometimes it's worth every penny." The weight of what he'd done, this stranger who'd appeared from nowhere to rescue her, settled on Katherine's shoulders. She'd been sold like cattle, then purchased back at triple price, only to be set free without conditions. Nothing in her life had prepared her for such an act. "At least let me thank you properly," she said. "My father's ranch is just—" "I know where it is," Preston interrupted gently. "And you're welcome to visit my place anytime. But right now, I think you should go home and have a long talk with your father." Katherine nodded, knowing he was right. There was much to discuss with George Zimmerman, not least of which was ensuring this never happened again. "I'll have someone bring your bag back to the ranch," Preston said, finally mounting his stallion. The horse danced slightly beneath him, eager to be moving. "Mr. James," Katherine called as he prepared to ride away. "I will repay you, somehow." Preston tipped his hat, the fading sunlight catching the gold in his brown hair. "Just live free, Miss Zimmerman. That's payment enough." With that, he was gone, leaving Katherine standing in the middle of the road with nothing but her carpetbag and a second chance she never expected. The walk back to her father's ranch gave Katherine time to think. The setting sun painted the desert landscape in shades of orange and purple, but she barely noticed the beauty around her. Her mind was fixed on Preston James, the enigmatic rancher who had appeared like an avenging angel to rescue her from a fate she couldn't bear to contemplate. George Zimmerman was sitting on the porch steps when she approached, his head in his hands. He looked up at the sound of her footsteps, disbelief washing over his tear-streaked face. "Katie," he whispered, rising unsteadily. "How are you here, Preston James?" she answered simply, setting down her bag. "He paid my debt, triple actually." Her father's face crumpled. "James." "Why would he do that?" "I don't know," Katherine admitted, though the question had been turning in her mind for the past hour. "But he did. And now we need to talk, Pa." Inside the modest ranch house, Katherine made coffee while her father sat at the kitchen table, looking every one of his 56 years and more. When she placed a steaming cup before him, his hands trembled as he reached for it. "I never thought it would come to this," he said hoarsely. "When your mother died, I promised her I'd take care of you. Instead, his voice broke. "You sold me, Pa," Katherine said, the words like ash in her mouth. Like one of the cattle, George couldn't meet her eyes. "Thornton was going to take the ranch, everything we have. I thought at least this way what? I'd be a servant in his house, or worse." The anger she'd been holding back began to surface. "Did you even ask what he wanted me for?" "He said you'd be a housekeeper," George protested weakly. Katherine's laugh was bitter. "And you believed him?" "Thornton, who's ruined half the families in this territory." "I was desperate, Katie. The debt. It just kept growing." Katherine sat across from him, her own coffee untouched. "This has to stop, Pa, the gambling, the drinking, all of it. We've been barely scraping by since Ma died, and every time you go to town, we lose more." "I know," he whispered. "God help me, I know." Katherine reached across the table to take his weathered hand. Despite her anger, she loved her father. He had been a good man once, before grief and whiskey had hollowed him out. "Mr. James gave us a second chance," she said firmly. "I won't let you waste it." George looked up, shame and gratitude warring in his eyes. "What did James want in return?" "Nothing," Katherine replied, still puzzled by this herself. "He said I don't owe anybody anything now, not even him." Her father shook his head in disbelief. "Nobody does something like that for nothing." Katherine had wondered the same thing, but Preston's eyes had held no deceit when he'd told her she was free. "Maybe some people just do the right thing because it's right." $15,000 is a lot of right thing, George muttered. Katherine couldn't argue with that. "Whatever his reasons, we have to honor what he did. That means no more gambling, Pa, not 1 cent. George's shoulders slumped, but he nodded. "I'll try, Katie, I swear it." "Trying isn't enough anymore," she said, her voice gentler now. "I'm going to handle all the money from now on. Every sale, every purchase goes through me." Her father looked as though he might protest, but the fight seemed to drain from him. "You're right. You've been right all along." He squeezed her hand. "I'm sorry, Katie, for everything." Katherine felt some of her anger melting away. Her father was flawed deeply so, but he was all the family she had left. "We'll get through this, Pa, but things have to change." As they sat in the gathering darkness, Katherine's thoughts returned to Preston James. Tomorrow, she decided, she would ride to his ranch. Not to repay him, she understood now that would only insult what he'd done, but to properly thank him. A man capable of such generosity deserved at least that much. The James Ranch stood in stark contrast to the struggling Zimmerman property. As Katherine rode up the following morning, she was struck by the size and condition of everything. The fences were new and sturdy, the barn freshly painted, and cattle dotted the green pastures that stretched toward the distant mountains. The main house was modest by wealthy standards, but impressive nonetheless, a two-story structure of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. A bunkhouse stood nearby, suggesting Preston employed several hands to manage his operation. Katherine felt suddenly self-conscious about her simple blue dress and the aging mare she rode. She'd taken extra care with her appearance that morning, pinning her chestnut hair into a neat bun and scrubbing her hands until the calluses gleamed, but she still felt woefully inadequate approaching such prosperity. A ranch hand spotted her as she approached and called out to someone inside the barn. Moments later, Preston himself emerged, wiping his hands on a cloth. He wore no jacket today, just a blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms tanned by the sun. His expression registered surprise when he recognized her. "Miss Zimmerman," he called, approaching her horse. "I didn't expect to see you so soon." Katherine smoothed her skirt nervously. "I hope I'm not interrupting your work, Mr. James." "Not at all." He reached up to help her dismount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her. "And please call me Preston." Katherine nodded, suddenly finding it difficult to meet his gaze directly. "Then you must call me Katherine." Preston smiled, and Katherine noticed for the first time how it transformed his face, softening the hard lines and lighting his blue eyes. "Katherine it is. Would you like some coffee? Or tea, perhaps?" She followed him toward the house, conscious of the curious glances from the ranch hands. "Coffee would be lovely, thank you." The interior of the house was as impressive as its exterior, clean and well appointed with solid furniture and a few carefully chosen decorative items. It wasn't ostentatious, but everything spoke of quality and care. "Did you build all this?" Katherine asked as Preston led her to a comfortable sitting room. "Most of it," he replied, gesturing for her to take a seat while he called for coffee. "I bought the land about a year ago, but the original house was little more than a shack." A middle-aged Mexican woman appeared with coffee and biscuits, giving Katherine a warm smile before disappearing back to what she presumed was the kitchen. "That's Rosa," Preston explained, pouring the coffee himself. "She keeps the house and cooks. Her husband, Miguel, is my foreman." Katherine accepted the cup gratefully. "You've accomplished a great deal in just a year." Preston shrugged modestly. "I had some advantages. I came west with capital from my family's shipping business in Boston." This explained the money, Katherine thought, though not why he'd spent so much of it on her. "I came to thank you properly," she said after a moment. "What you did yesterday, I still can't quite believe it." Preston's expression grew serious. "I didn't do it for thanks, Katherine." "Then why did you do it?" The question had burned in her mind since yesterday. $15,000 is a fortune. Preston set his coffee down and seemed to consider his words carefully. 5 years ago, my younger sister found herself in a similar situation. Our father had died, leaving substantial debts, and a business associate offered to forgive what was owed if she would marry him. His jaw tightened at the memory. He was 40 years her senior and known for his cruelty to servants and wives alike. Katherine's heart constricted. "What happened?" "I was away at sea when the arrangement was made. By the time I returned." Preston's eyes darkened with old pain. She'd taken her own life rather than submit to such a fate. "I'm so sorry," Katherine whispered, understanding flooding through her. "When I heard what Thornton was doing, I couldn't stand by and watch another young woman being traded like property." Preston's gaze met hers, intense and unwavering. "The money means nothing compared to that." Katherine felt tears prickling behind her eyes. This wasn't just generosity, it was a deeply personal act of redemption. "Your sister would be proud of what you did. A shadow of a smile touched his lips. "I'd like to think so." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the weight of shared understanding between them. "How did your father take your return?" Preston finally asked. Katherine sighed. "He was shocked, then grateful. We had a long talk. Things are going to change." "Do you believe they will?" The directness of his question surprised her. "I have to try. He's my father, and he's all I have." Preston nodded, though something in his expression suggested he had reservations. "And the ranch? Will you be able to manage?" "We'll need to build our herd back up," Katherine admitted. "Pa sold too many cattle to pay smaller debts before this one. But we have good grazing land, and I'm not afraid of hard work." "I admire that about you," Preston said quietly. Katherine felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected compliment. "You hardly know me, Mr. James Preston." "I know enough," he replied simply. "I've seen you at church and in town. People speak highly of your character and determination." Katherine hadn't realized she'd been noticed, let alone discussed. "People talk too much in small towns," she said with a small smile. "Perhaps. But in this case they speak the truth." Preston leaned forward slightly. "I have a proposition for you, Katherine. A business proposition," he clarified quickly. "What kind of proposition?" she asked cautiously. "I have more cattle than I can properly manage on my grazing lands," he explained. "I've been looking to expand, but buying more property outright isn't ideal right now. If you'd be willing to graze some of my herd on your land, I'd pay a fair price. It would give you steady income while you rebuild." Katherine considered the offer. It was generous but not charity. They had ample grazing land that currently sat underutilized. "That's very kind, but it's not kindness. It's good business," Preston interrupted gently. "Your land has some of the best water access in the territory. My cattle would thrive there." The practicality of the arrangement was appealing. It would provide the stable income they desperately needed without her father having to sell more of their own stock. "I'd need to discuss it with my father," she said finally. "But I think it could work for both of us." Preston's smile returned. "Excellent. Why don't you bring him here tomorrow? We can discuss the details together." As Katherine prepared to leave a short while later, Preston walked her to her horse. The morning sun had climbed higher, bathing the ranch in golden light. "Thank you again," Katherine said as he helped her mount. "Not just for yesterday, but for today as well." Preston looked up at her, his hand lingering briefly on the mare's bridle. "Will I see you tomorrow, then?" "Yes, I think so, if Pa is feeling up to the ride." "I look forward to it." There was something in his voice that made Katherine's pulse quicken slightly. As she rode away, Katherine couldn't help glancing back. Preston stood where she'd left him, watching her departure, his tall figure silhouetted against the backdrop of the thriving ranch he'd built from almost nothing. For the first time in years, Katherine felt something stir within her, something beyond the daily struggle to survive, beyond the constant worry about her father's debts. It was a feeling so foreign she almost didn't recognize it. Hope. The next morning brought clear skies and a mild breeze, perfect riding weather. Katherine had explained Preston's proposal to her father the previous evening, and to her surprise, George had agreed immediately. "James is a good man," he'd said, with uncharacteristic firmness. "Not many would do what he did for us. If he wants to use our grazing land, it's the least we can offer in return." Now, as they rode toward the James ranch, Katherine studied her father's profile. He looked better today, clearer-eyed and steadier than he'd been in months. He'd shaved carefully and worn his good shirt, small gestures that nonetheless gave Katherine hope that he truly meant to change. "This arrangement could be good for us," she ventured. "Give us time to rebuild our herd properly." George nodded. "James knows cattle. His stock is some of the finest I've seen in these parts." They were met at the ranch by Miguel, Preston's foreman, who led them to a small office attached to the main house. Preston rose from behind his desk as they entered, extending his hand to George. "Mr. Zimmerman, it's good to finally meet you properly." George's handshake was firm. "Mr. James, I want to thank you for what you did for my daughter. I know there's no way I can ever repay." Preston held up a hand. "There's nothing to repay, sir. I'm just glad I was in a position to help." Katherine watched the exchange with interest. There was no condescension in Preston's manner, no hint that he viewed her father as the broken man he'd become. Instead, he treated George with the respect due to a neighboring rancher and potential business partner. They spent the next hour discussing the details of the arrangement. Preston proposed grazing 100 head on the Zimmerman land, paying a monthly fee that was, Katherine suspected, somewhat above market rate. He also offered the services of 2 of his hands to help maintain the fencing and assist with the Zimmerman's own cattle when needed. "This seems more than fair," George said when Preston had outlined the full proposal. "Though I worry we're getting the better end of the deal." Preston smiled. "Good water and grazing land is hard to come by in these parts, Mr. Zimmerman. Your property has both in abundance. This arrangement benefits me as much as it does you." Katherine, who had remained largely silent during the negotiations, appreciated Preston's tact. He was helping them while preserving her father's dignity, a delicate balance few would have managed so gracefully. The deal was sealed with handshakes, and Preston suggested they inspect some of the cattle that would be moved to the Zimmerman ranch. "They're in the south pasture," he explained as they exited the office. "We can ride out there if you're not too tired from your journey." "Not at all," George replied, seeming energized by the business transaction. "I'd like to see the stock." As they walked toward the stables, Preston fell into step beside Katherine. "Your father knows his business," he said quietly. "He asked all the right questions." Katherine smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "He was one of the best ranchers in the territory before." She trailed off, unwilling to bring up the gambling and drinking that had nearly ruined them. "Before life got complicated," Preston finished diplomatically. "It happens to the best of men sometimes." The ride to the south pasture took them through some of the most beautiful parts of the James property. Katherine couldn't help admiring the thoughtful way the land had been developed, the strategic placement of windbreaks, the careful rotation of grazing areas, the well-maintained watering holes. "You've put a lot of thought into this place," she observed as they crested a small hill overlooking a valley where cattle grazed peacefully. Preston nodded. "I spent a year studying ranching operations before I bought this land. I wanted to understand every aspect before I invested." "It shows," she said sincerely. "Most newcomers make at least a few obvious mistakes." "Oh, I've made plenty," Preston laughed. "Just ask Miguel. He's had to rescue me from my own folly more than once." Katherine found herself charmed by his honesty. So many men in his position would boast of their successes while hiding their failures. They spent an hour examining the cattle. Preston had selected for the arrangement healthy young steers with good conformation and calm temperaments. George inspected them with a professional eye, occasionally asking questions that Preston answered readily. By the time they returned to the main house, Katherine was pleased to see her father looking more like his old self than he had in years, engaged, knowledgeable, and sober. Rosa had prepared lunch, which they ate on the wide porch overlooking the property. The conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from cattle prices to the upcoming harvest festival in town. "Will you be attending the festival, Miss Zimmerman?" Preston asked as Rosa brought coffee after the meal. Katherine hesitated. "I haven't given it much thought. In truth, social events had fallen by the wayside as their financial situation had deteriorated. She couldn't remember the last time she'd bought a new dress or thought about such frivolities. "You should go," George said unexpectedly. "You haven't been to a social in too long, Katie." Preston smiled. "It would be my pleasure to escort you if you'd allow it." Katherine felt a flush creep into her cheeks. Was he asking to court her? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose." "It would be no imposition," Preston assured her, his blue eyes warm. "Quite the opposite, in fact." George cleared his throat. "Well, that's settled then. My daughter will go to the festival with you, Mr. James." Katherine shot her father a look of mild exasperation, but she couldn't deny the flutter of excitement in her chest. "It seems I've been spoken for," she said with a small smile. "Thank you for the invitation." As they prepared to leave, Preston walked them to their horses. "I'll have Miguel bring the first of the cattle over tomorrow, if that suits you." "That would be fine," George agreed, mounting his horse with more ease than he had in months. Preston turned to Katherine as she prepared to mount her mare. "I'll call on you Saturday for the festival, if that's acceptable." "Yes," she replied, suddenly shy under his direct gaze. "Saturday would be perfect." He helped her onto her horse, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "Until Saturday, then." As they rode home, Katherine found herself wondering what it would be like to attend the harvest festival on Preston James's arm. The prospect filled her with a nervous anticipation she hadn't felt in years. "He's sweet on you," George observed, breaking into her thoughts. Katherine startled. "Pa, don't be ridiculous. He's just being neighborly." George chuckled, the sound so reminiscent of happier times that it caught Katherine off guard. "Neighborly doesn't include paying $15,000 to rescue a woman he barely knows, Katie." "He did that because of his sister," Katherine protested, having shared Preston's story with her father. "Maybe that's part of it," George conceded. "But I saw the way he looks at you. That man didn't just rescue you because of some past tragedy. He sees something in you worth fighting for." Katherine had no response to that. The idea that Preston might harbor genuine feelings for her seemed too incredible to contemplate. Yet as they rode home through the golden afternoon light, she couldn't help wondering if her father might be right. The days leading up to the harvest festival passed in a flurry of activity. True to his word, Preston sent Miguel with the first group of cattle the day after their meeting. Katherine found herself busy helping to settle the new additions, checking fences, and ensuring the watering holes were adequate for the increased herd. To her surprise and relief, her father threw himself into the work with renewed vigor. He rose early, worked steadily throughout the day, and most importantly, hadn't touched a drop of whiskey since her return. It was too soon to trust completely in this transformation, but Katherine allowed herself cautious optimism. By Friday, her thoughts turned increasingly to the festival and her upcoming evening with Preston. Standing before the small mirror in her bedroom, Katherine surveyed her limited wardrobe with dismay. Her best dress was at least 3 years old, its blue fabric faded from numerous washings. A knock at her door interrupted her contemplation. "Katie, can I come in?" her father called. "Of course, Pa." George entered, holding something behind his back. "I've got something for you," he said, almost shyly. He brought his hands forward, revealing a package wrapped in brown paper. "I rode into town today while you were checking the north pasture. Thought you might want something special for tomorrow night." Katherine unwrapped the package with trembling fingers to find a length of beautiful emerald green fabric. "Oh, Pa," she whispered, running her hand over the soft material. "It's beautiful, but we can't afford we can now," he interrupted gently. "The first payment from James came today. More than fair, just as he promised. And you deserve something nice, Katie, after everything." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. It wasn't just the gift that moved her, but what it represented: her father thinking of her needs, planning ahead, staying away from the gambling tables even with money in his pocket. Mrs. Rodriguez said she can help you make it up tomorrow morning, George continued. Said it wouldn't take long with both of you working on it. Katherine hugged her father tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of tobacco and leather. Thank you, Pa. George held her for a moment, then pulled back, clearing his throat gruffly to hide his emotion. You'll be the prettiest girl at that festival. James won't know what hit him. The next morning brought Mrs. Rodriguez, the wife of a neighboring rancher and an accomplished seamstress. Under her expert guidance, the green fabric was transformed into a simple but elegant dress that complemented Katherine's slender figure and brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. You look like your mother, George said softly when Katherine emerged from her room that afternoon, the new dress fitting perfectly. She would be so proud of the woman you've become. Katherine smoothed the skirt nervously. You really think it looks all right? Better than all right, her father assured her. You're beautiful, Katie. The sound of approaching hoofbeats announced Preston's arrival. Katherine's heart quickened as she moved to the window, catching sight of him riding up to the house. He wore a black suit and crisp white shirt, his usually tousled brown hair neatly combed beneath his hat. He looked handsome and distinguished, every inch the successful rancher. He's here, she whispered, suddenly overcome with nerves. George squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. Just be yourself, Katie. That's more than enough. Preston's appreciative gaze when she opened the door told Katherine everything she needed to know about how she looked. For a moment, he seemed unable to speak, his blue eyes taking in the sight of her in the new dress. Katherine, he finally managed, you look absolutely stunning. She felt a blush warm her cheeks. Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself. Preston had brought his buggy rather than saddling a horse for her, a thoughtful gesture that would allow them to travel to town in comfort. As he helped her up into the seat, his hand lingered on hers a moment longer than necessary, sending a pleasant shiver through her. The drive to town gave them time to talk, and Katherine found herself relaxing in Preston's company. He told her stories of his seafaring days before he came west, painting vivid pictures of exotic ports and adventures that made her laugh. In turn, she shared happier memories of her childhood on the ranch, before her mother's death and her father's decline. Silver Springs was transformed for the Harvest Festival. Lanterns hung from every available post, casting a warm glow over the town square. Tables laden with food lined one side, while a platform had been erected for the musicians. Couples already twirled to the lively fiddle music, and children darted between the adults, their faces sticky with candy. It's beautiful, Katherine breathed as Preston helped her down from the buggy. Not as beautiful as my companion, he replied, offering his arm. The evening passed like a dream. Preston was attentive without being overbearing, introducing Katherine to people she didn't know and engaging easily with those she did. They danced several times, his hand warm and steady at her waist, his steps sure as he guided her through the figures. During a break in the dancing, Preston brought her a glass of punch and led her to a quieter spot away from the main festivities. The night air had grown cooler, and Katherine was grateful for the shawl she'd brought. Are you enjoying yourself? Preston asked, his expression earnest in the lantern light. Very much, she replied truthfully. I can't remember the last time I had such fun. Preston's smile was warm. I'm glad. You deserve some happiness, Katherine. She studied him curiously. You speak as though happiness is something earned rather than found. Perhaps it's both, he suggested. Some find it without effort while others must work for it. Either way, it seems to me you've earned your share many times over. The genuine concern in his voice touched her deeply. In that moment, Katherine realized she was falling for this man who had appeared so unexpectedly in her life. "May I ask you something, Preston?" she said, gathering her courage. "Anything. Why did you really help me that day? I know about your sister, but—" She hesitated. Was that the only reason? Preston was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the distant dancers. "No," he finally admitted. "That wasn't the only reason." He turned to face her fully. "I'd noticed you before at church in town. You always carried yourself with such dignity despite the whispers about your father's troubles. I admired your strength, your loyalty." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "When I heard what had happened, I couldn't bear the thought of someone like you being treated as property. The memory of my sister gave me courage to act, but you were the reason I wanted to." Katherine's heart hammered in her chest. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Preston assured her. "I didn't help you to earn your gratitude or anything else. I meant what I said that day. You don't owe me anything. And if I want to give something freely," she asked softly, "not out of obligation but choice," Preston's gaze intensified, "that would be different entirely." The music had slowed, and around them, couples swayed to a gentler melody. Without speaking, Preston held out his hand. Katherine placed hers in it without hesitation, allowing him to lead her back to the dancing area. This dance was different from the earlier ones. Preston held her closer, his hand at the small of her back guiding her through the steps with intimate precision. Katherine felt as though they were in their own world, moving together as if they'd been partners for years rather than hours. "People are watching," she murmured, aware of the curious glances directed their way. "Let them," Preston replied, his voice low and meant only for her. "I'm dancing with the most beautiful woman at the festival. I want everyone to see." As the evening drew to a close, Preston drove Katherine home beneath a sky brilliant with stars. The road was quiet, with most festival goers still celebrating in town. "Thank you for tonight," Katherine said as the buggy rolled smoothly through the darkness. "I haven't enjoyed myself so much in years." "The pleasure was mine," Preston replied, his profile strong in the moonlight. "I hope we can do it again soon." When they arrived at the ranch, lights still burned in the windows, her father waiting up for her return. Preston helped her down from the buggy and walked her to the porch, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path. At the door, Katherine turned to bid him good night and found him standing closer than she'd expected, his tall form silhouetted against the starlit sky. "May I call on you again, Katherine?" he asked, his voice gentle in the quiet night. "I'd like that very much," she replied, her heart fluttering beneath her ribs. Preston reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and took her hand in his. His thumb traced a light pattern across her knuckles, sending shivers up her arm. "Good night, Katherine," he said softly, raising her hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her skin. "Good night, Preston," she whispered, reluctant for the moment to end. As his buggy disappeared down the drive, Katherine touched the spot where his lips had brushed her hand, still feeling the warmth of his touch. For the first time in years, the future seemed full of promise rather than dread. Inside, her father looked up from his book, his expression curious but not intrusive. "Have a good time." Katherine couldn't suppress her smile. "The best." The weeks that followed marked a transformation for both Katherine and her father. George remained steadfastly sober, throwing himself into the work of the ranch with renewed purpose. The arrangement with Preston proved beneficial beyond the financial aspects. Having responsibility for his cattle seemed to restore George's sense of pride and competence. For Katherine, the changes were more subtle but no less profound. Preston called on her regularly, sometimes riding over to help with work around the ranch, other times taking her on drives to picturesque spots in the territory. Each visit deepened her feelings for him, and she found herself looking forward to their time together with an anticipation that brightened even the most difficult days. One crisp October afternoon, they rode to a mesa overlooking the valley where both their ranches lay. The autumn sunlight bathed the landscape in golden light, and the distant mountains stood clear against the impossibly blue sky. "It's breathtaking," Katherine said as Preston spread a blanket for their picnic. "It's one of my favorite spots," he agreed, helping her sit before unpacking the basket Rosa had prepared. "I came here often when I first arrived, trying to decide if this was where I wanted to build my future." Katherine accepted the plate he offered, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. "And was it what you were looking for?" Preston's gaze was steady. "It's becoming more what I hoped for every day." They ate in companionable silence for a while, enjoying the view and the simple pleasure of being together away from the demands of ranch life. "Your father seems to be doing well," Preston observed after a while. "Miguel says he's impressed with his knowledge of cattle." Katherine smiled, warmed by the praise of her father. "He's like a different man these past weeks. I'd almost forgotten what he was like before." She trailed off, not wanting to dwell on darker times. "People can change when given the right reasons," Preston said thoughtfully. "Sometimes all it takes is remembering what's truly important." "I think having purpose again has made all the difference," Katherine agreed. "That and knowing someone believes in him." Preston reached across the blanket to take her hand. "You never stopped believing in him, did you?" "Even at his worst," Katherine considered this. "I suppose I didn't. He's my father. Despite everything, I knew the good man was still in there somewhere." "That's one of the things I admire most about you, Katherine," Preston said, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. "Your capacity for faith in others, even when they've given you reason to doubt." The genuine admiration in his voice made her breath catch. "You make me sound better than I am. I've had my moments of anger and resentment too." "That only makes your loyalty more remarkable," he insisted. "It's easy to stand by someone who never disappoints you. The true test is standing by them when they do." Katherine studied their joined hands, marveling at how natural it felt to be connected to him this way. "May I ask you something personal, Preston?" "Of course." "Why haven't you married?" "A successful man like yourself must have had opportunities." Preston's expression grew thoughtful. "I suppose I was waiting for the right person." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "Someone who values the same things I do: honesty, loyalty, hard work. Someone who sees beyond material success to what truly matters." Katherine felt her heart quicken at the intensity in his gaze. "And have you found this person?" A slow smile spread across his face. "I believe I have." Before she could respond, Preston shifted closer on the blanket, his free hand coming up to gently touch her cheek. "Katherine, I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never felt this way about anyone. You've captured my heart completely." Katherine leaned into his touch, her own feelings too overwhelming for words. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. "Yes," she whispered, her eyes closing as he leaned in. His lips met hers with gentle pressure, the kiss tender and questioning. Katherine responded tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as the sweetness of the moment overcame her shyness. His hand cradled her face with exquisite care, as though she were something infinitely precious. When they finally parted, Katherine kept her eyes closed for a moment longer, savoring the sensation. When she opened them, Preston was watching her with such warmth that she felt it spread through her entire body. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Katherine Zimmerman," he said simply. The words she'd hardly dared hope to hear filled her with joy. "And I with you, Preston James." He gathered her into his arms then, holding her close as the sun began its descent toward the distant mountains. In that moment, Katherine felt truly free, not just from the debt that had nearly claimed her future, but from the fears and limitations that had constrained her heart for so long. As autumn deepened into winter, the relationship between Katherine and Preston blossomed. He became a regular visitor at the Zimmerman ranch, often staying for supper after helping with the day's work. George welcomed his presence, the two men developing a genuine respect for one another as they worked side by side. The transformation in her father continued, each day of sobriety building upon the last until Katherine began to truly believe in his recovery. He attended church regularly now, participated in community events, and had even begun to rebuild friendships that his drinking had damaged. One evening in early December, as snow fell softly outside, the three of them sat around the kitchen table after supper. Preston had brought them each a small gift: leather gloves for George, and a beautiful hand-carved wooden box for Katherine. "This is too fine for everyday use," she protested, running her fingers over the intricate floral pattern carved into the lid. "Open it," Preston encouraged with a smile. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a star, hanging from a fine chain. "Preston," she breathed, lifting it carefully. "It's beautiful. It reminded me of the night we danced under the stars at the Harvest Festival," he explained, his eyes warm in the lamplight. George cleared his throat. "Think I'll check on the horses before turning in," he said, a knowing smile playing at his lips as he donned his new gloves and headed outside, leaving them alone. Preston moved to stand behind Katherine's chair, taking the necklace from her hands. "May I?" She nodded, gathering her hair to one side as he fastened the chain around her neck. The pendant rested just below her collarbone, cool against her skin. "Perfect," Preston murmured, his hands coming to rest lightly on her shoulders. Katherine touched the star, feeling its delicate points beneath her fingertips. "Thank you, I'll treasure it." Preston helped her to her feet, turning her gently to face him. "Katherine, there's something I want to ask you." Her heart began to race as she recognized the seriousness in his expression. "Yes, these past months have been the happiest of my life," he began, taking both her hands in his. "Getting to know you, watching your strength and compassion in everything you do, I find myself falling deeper in love with you every day." Katherine felt tears gathering in her eyes. "And I with you." Preston took a deep breath. "I came west seeking a new beginning, but I never imagined finding someone who would make that new life complete." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. "Katherine Zimmerman, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" He opened the box to reveal a ring with a single perfect diamond set in gold, sparkling in the lamplight. Katherine gasped, her free hand flying to her mouth. "I know it hasn't been very long," Preston continued earnestly, "but I'm certain of my feelings. I want to build a life with you to face whatever comes together." Tears spilled onto Katherine's cheeks as joy overwhelmed her. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly. "Yes, Preston, I will marry you." His face lit with happiness as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her hand alone. "I love you, Katherine," he said softly, drawing her into his arms. "And I love you," she replied, before his lips found hers in a kiss that promised forever. They were still standing in the circle of each other's arms when George returned, stomping snow from his boots. His face broke into a wide smile at the sight of them. "Well?" he asked, though the answer was clear from their expressions. "She said yes," Preston confirmed, his arm still around Katherine's waist. George crossed the room in 3 strides to embrace them both. "Couldn't ask for a finer man for my daughter," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Your mother would be so happy, Katie." The three of them sat talking late into the night, making plans for the wedding and their future. They decided on a spring ceremony, allowing time for preparations and for the worst of winter to pass. "Will you live at Preston's ranch?" George asked, the question clearly difficult for him. Katherine exchanged a look with her fiancé. They had already discussed this. "We thought perhaps we could split our time between both properties," she explained gently. "They're close enough to make it practical, and that way neither would be neglected." Relief washed over her father's face. "That sounds sensible. And you'll always have a place with us, Mr. Zimmerman," Preston added sincerely. "Wherever we are," George nodded, visibly moved by the inclusion. "I appreciate that, son." As the winter deepened, preparations for the spring wedding occupied much of Katherine's time. Preston rode to Santa Fe to order special items they couldn't get in Silver Springs fabric for her wedding dress, ingredients for the cake, and other small luxuries to make the day special. Christmas was celebrated with a quiet exchange of gifts, and a dinner that brought together Preston's ranch hands and the neighboring families who had remained friends through the Zimmermans' difficult years. Katherine watched her father laughing and talking with old friends, Preston at his side, and felt a profound gratitude for how much had changed in just a few months. January brought heavy snows that made travel between the ranches difficult. Preston stayed at his own place more often, focusing on keeping his cattle fed and healthy through the harsh weather. Katherine missed him desperately, but understood the demands of ranch life all too well. When February arrived with a brief thaw, Preston appeared at their door with his buggy and a determined expression. "I'm taking you to town," he announced. "The roads are passable for the first time in weeks, and I can't wait another day to see my fiancée properly." Katherine laughed, delighted by his impetuosity. "Let me get my coat." In town, they visited the dressmaker who was creating Katherine's wedding gown, checked on the order for Preston's new suit, and had lunch at the hotel, a rare treat that felt decadently luxurious after weeks of home cooking. "3 more months," Preston said as they shared a slice of apple pie. "Sometimes it feels like forever," Katherine smiled, understanding completely. "And other times it seems too soon, so many preparations still to make." "We could elope," he suggested with a mischievous twinkle in his eye. "Preston James, you wouldn't dare deprive the good people of Silver Springs of the social event of the season," she teased back. He captured her hand across the table. "As long as I get to call you my wife at the end of the day, I don't care if we marry in a cathedral or a barn." His sincerity warmed her through. 3 months isn't so very long in the grand scheme of things. "It is when I miss you every moment we're apart," he replied simply. The winter gradually released its grip on the land, and as March brought the first hints of spring, wedding preparations intensified. Katherine's dress was finally ready, a creation of ivory satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs that made her look like a princess from a fairy tale. "You're going to take his breath away," Mrs. Rodriguez declared as Katherine twirled in the finished gown during her final fitting. April arrived with an explosion of wildflowers across the range and the birth of new calves in both herds. The increased workload kept everyone busy, but nothing could dampen the excitement as the wedding day approached. 2 weeks before the ceremony, Preston rode to the Zimmerman ranch with news. "I've been thinking about our future," he said as they walked together along the creek that formed the boundary between their properties. "About the idea of dividing our time between the 2 ranches." Katherine felt a momentary anxiety. "Have you changed your mind?" "Not exactly," he said, taking her hand. "But I've had another idea. What would you think about joining the 2 properties? Legally, I mean, as one ranch." Join them, Katherine repeated, surprised by the suggestion. Preston nodded. Your father could still manage his portion, but we'd combine resources, share the work more efficiently. In time, it could become one of the most successful operations in the territory. Katherine considered the proposal. It made practical sense, but more importantly, it would ensure her father remained an integral part of their lives, with meaningful work and purpose. I think it's a wonderful idea, she said finally. Have you mentioned it to Pa? I wanted your opinion first, Preston replied. It would be our future, after all. The thoughtfulness of this, his consistent inclusion of her in decisions that would affect them both, reinforced Katherine's certainty that she had found a true partner in Preston James. Let's talk to him tonight, she suggested. I think he'll be pleased. She was right. George received the proposal with enthusiasm, his eyes lighting up at the prospect of building something that would last beyond his lifetime, a legacy for Katherine and, someday, their children. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of spring blossoms. The small church in Silver Springs was decorated with wildflowers and ribbons, and it seemed the entire town had turned out for the occasion. In the small room at the back of the church where she prepared, Katherine stood before the mirror in her wedding gown, hardly recognizing the radiant woman who looked back at her. The star pendant Preston had given her glinted at her throat, and her mother's veil cascaded from her carefully arranged hair. A knock at the door announced her father. George entered, handsome in his best suit, his face softening at the sight of his daughter. You look just like her, he said quietly. Your mother would be so proud today. Katherine blinked back tears. I wish she could be here. She is, Katie, George said, taking her hands in his. In every way that matters. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package. I have something for you. Your mother wore it on our wedding day. Inside the package lay a delicate handkerchief edged with lace, a small blue flower embroidered in one corner. Something old and something blue, George explained. She'd want you to have it. Katherine carefully tucked the handkerchief into her sleeve, then took her father's arm. I'm ready. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. Katherine would later remember fragments, the look of wonder on Preston's face as she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, the weight of the gold band as he slipped it onto her finger, the catch in his voice as he promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister declared. You may kiss your bride. Preston's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, a beginning rather than an ending, as they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. James. Katherine felt a sense of rightness that transcended the moment, as though everything in her life had been leading her to this day, this man, this future they would build together. The celebration afterward was joyous, with food and dancing lasting well into the evening. As the sun began to set, Preston led Katherine to his waiting buggy, decorated with flowers and ribbons for the occasion. Ready to go home, Mrs. James? He asked, helping her up into the seat. Home, she repeated, savoring the word. Yes, I believe I am. They spent their wedding night at Preston's ranch, their ranch now in the master bedroom he had renovated especially for her arrival. Rose petals scattered across the quilt and candles casting a warm glow created an atmosphere of romance that brought a blush to Katherine's cheeks. Welcome home, Preston whispered as he carried her across the threshold. Their first night together as husband and wife was everything Katherine had dreamed it would be: tender, passionate, and filled with discoveries that left her breathless. In Preston's arms, she found a love so profound it seemed to remake her from within, healing wounds she hadn't known she carried. The days and weeks that followed established the rhythm of their new life together. Katherine divided her time between keeping house at their main ranch and helping her father maintain the Zimmerman property. Preston threw himself into the work of joining the two operations, his business acumen complementing George's practical experience with cattle. By midsummer, it was clear their marriage had brought prosperity as well as happiness. The combined herds were thriving, and Preston's connections in the East had secured favorable contracts for their beef. For the first time in years, there was money not just for necessities, but for small luxuries and improvements to both properties. More precious than material success, however, was the sense of family they had created. George, fully committed to his sobriety, had become Preston's trusted advisor and friend. The three of them often sat on the porch after supper, planning for the future and sharing stories of the day's work. It was during one such evening in early autumn that Katherine made an announcement that brought both men to their feet in joy. "A baby," Preston repeated, his face alight with wonder. "You're certain?" Katherine nodded, her hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "Doctor Wilson confirmed it today. He says the baby should arrive in early spring." Preston knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Katherine, you've made me the happiest man in the territory." George wiped at his eyes unashamedly. "A grandchild," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mother would be so happy, Katie." The months of Katherine's pregnancy passed quickly, filled with preparations for the baby and the ongoing work of the ranch. Preston became even more protective, insisting she rest frequently and hiring additional help to ensure she didn't overexert herself. "I'm with child, not made of glass," she protested one day when he insisted on carrying a basket of laundry that was hardly heavy. Preston grinned, unrepentant. "Indulge me, Mrs. James. I intend to spoil both you and our child shamelessly." The baby, a healthy boy they named William George James, arrived on a perfect spring morning, almost exactly a year after their wedding. Preston paced anxiously outside their bedroom while the midwife attended Katherine, George keeping him company with stories of his own similar vigil before Katherine's birth. When the first cry rang out, both men froze, then embraced in spontaneous joy. Moments later, the midwife opened the door, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son, Mr. James. Mother and baby are doing just fine." Preston approached the bed where Katherine lay, their son cradled in her arms, with a reverence that brought tears to her eyes. "He's perfect," he whispered, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. "Just like his mother." Katherine smiled up at her husband, exhausted but radiant. "Would you like to hold your son?" As Preston cradled William for the first time, his expression of wonder and love confirmed what Katherine already knew, that their family, born from a moment of crisis and an act of extraordinary generosity, was the greatest blessing life could bestow. 5 years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising. The combined James Zimmerman Ranch had become one of the most successful in the territory, allowing them to purchase additional land and expand their operations. 2 more children joined the family: Elizabeth Rose, born 2 years after William, and young Thomas, who had just celebrated his first birthday. George Zimmerman, now in his 60s but still vigorous, had become a beloved grandfather, spending hours teaching the older children about horses and cattle. His transformation from broken man to respected elder seemed nothing short of miraculous to those who remembered darker days. One evening, as autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, Preston and Katherine sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching William and Elizabeth play while Thomas slept in his mother's arms. "You ever think about that day?" Preston asked quietly. "When I stopped Thornton's men on the road," Katherine smiled, shifting Thomas to her shoulder. "Often. It was the day everything changed. Preston reached over to take her free hand. I remember thinking I was just doing what was right, that I couldn't stand by and let what happened to my sister happen to you. He paused, watching their children with eyes full of love. I had no idea I was actually saving my own future. We saved each other, Katherine replied softly. You from the past that haunted you, me from the one that threatened to claim me. Preston leaned over to kiss her gently, careful not to disturb their sleeping son. Best $15,000 I ever spent. Katherine laughed, the sound carrying across the property they had built together. A bargain, I'd say. As the sun set on their land that would someday belong to their children and their children's children, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the desperate day she'd been sold to pay her father's debts to this moment of contentment, surrounded by the family she and Preston had created. She had been right that day on the road, though she hadn't known it then. Preston James hadn't just bought her freedom, he had invested in justice. And the returns on that investment, love, family, purpose, joy, had proven immeasurable. I love you, Preston James, she said simply, the words carrying the weight of all they had built together. And I love you, Katherine James, he replied, his voice warm with the certainty of a man who had found everything he'd ever sought. Today, tomorrow, and all the days to come. The light faded from the sky, stars appearing one by one above the land they had nurtured together, a testament to what could grow from the barren soil of hardship when watered with compassion, cultivated with respect, and harvested with love. What had begun as a desperate transaction had blossomed into something neither could have imagined that dusty day on the road. She had been sold to pay a debt, but in being bought back, Katherine had found not just freedom but a future richer than any fortune could measure. As they gathered their children and moved inside to the warmth of the home they had built together, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that some debts could never be fully repaid, and that the most valuable things in life were those freely given, with no expectation of return.